Okay, let's dive right in. Today, we're bringing you an explainer that completely reframes a classic. You know, that coming of age story you probably read back in middle school or high school? Well, we are going to look at it as an essential adult oriented masterclass on navigating and challenging societal prejudice. We usually look at Harper Lee's work through the innocent eyes of childhood, but when we revisit it as adults, it reveals a really profound structured guide for maintaining kindness in an often deeply intolerant world. This iconic advice from Atticus Finch instantly hooks us onto our core theme, right? It's the fundamental rule of standing in somebody else's shoes. Now, it sounds incredibly simple on paper, but actually applying that kind of demand for reflection and compassion, that is tough, rigorous work. But as you'll see, it is the ultimate moral weapon against the dehumanizing forces of a divided society. So, here is our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to walk step by step, starting with the harsh economics of the 1930s, exploring Atticus's moral codes, dissecting class divides, analyzing survival strategies, and finally, wrapping up with practical teaching techniques you can use today. All right, Section 1. To really wrap our heads around the deep-seated conflicts in Maycomb County, we have to set the stage and look at the brutal economic reality of the era. Because you see, racism in the 1930s South didn't just happen in a vacuum. It was massively intensified by the crushing scarcity of the Great Depression. The sources highlight this massive ripple effect. Professional people, like doctors and lawyers, were basically broke specifically because the farmers were broke. I mean, nickels and dimes were incredibly hard to come by. And in that environment of absolute grinding scarcity, poor whites and African Americans found themselves fiercely competing for the exact same physical labor jobs. Naturally, that drove social tensions absolutely through the roof. Think about it. When economic stability goes out the window, what do people cling to? For many poor whites in the 1930s, the answer was a fabricated social hierarchy. Maintaining this rigid caste system and spatial separation from the Black community, it became a misguided, frankly desperate way to protect their own fragile social standing. In a lot of ways, the prejudice was fueled directly by economic panic. Moving on to Section 2, let's get into the theory and pinpoint the exact moral codes Atticus Finch uses to fight back against this ingrained community prejudice. First up, conscience. Atticus famously teaches his kids about this, and notice how much he emphasizes independence. Literally, the majority of Maycomb County completely disagrees with him defending Tom Robinson. But Atticus, he insists that true moral correctness exists completely outside of what the majority thinks. You just can't vote on what's morally right. Your conscience has to be the final judge. Which leads us to courage. Atticus entirely redefines what courage actually means. He strips it away from the macho idea of a man holding a gun and reestablishes it as moral perseverance. It's knowing you're licked before you begin, but doing it anyway. That is exactly why he takes Tom Robinson's case. He knows for a fact that the racist all-white jury will probably convict Tom despite the evidence. But he takes it anyway, because giving up before you even start, that's the real death of moral integrity. He truly believes the justice system has to be absolutely colorblind. He respectfully presents the evidence in court, even politely calling his accuser, Myella Ewell, ma'am, literally to the point where she thinks she's being mocked just because she has never experienced basic courtesy in her life. And let's not forget, he physically stands outside a jailhouse to face down a lynch mob. He does all of this because his moral code demands that he protect the innocent, no matter what it costs him personally. Okay, Section 3. Now we'll look at a few specific case studies of how class, race, and respect all crash into each other in Maycomb. Let's look at the stark contrast between the Cunninghams and the Ewells. Both of these families represent the poorest white citizens of Maycomb, and both were hit devastatingly hard by the Depression. But Harper Lee uses them to totally break down social class differences. On one hand, you have the Cunninghams. They keep their pride. They refuse to take a single dime of government relief they can't pay back, choosing to pay Atticus in hickory nuts and turnip greens instead. On the other hand, the Ewells are lawless, abusive, they take the relief checks and just waste the money. It's a perfect example that while both families are dirt poor, their moral character and self-respect are night and day. Poverty does not automatically dictate your morality. And that brings us to a really crucial lesson on respect, courtesy of Calpurnia, the Finch's cook. There's the scene where young Walter Cunningham comes over for lunch and just drowns his food in syrup. Scout, being a kid, rudely questions him about it. Well, Calpurnia immediately pulls Scout aside and scolds her, telling her never to act all high and mighty about her company's ways. It's a great reminder of why basic respect matters so much. Regardless of someone's socioeconomic background or their quirks, when they are in your home, you treat them with absolute dignity. Because respect is built over time, right? The source text points out this fantastic little detail. Early on, Atticus takes the time to teach Jem to keep his dirty shoes off the bed. Then, later in the story, Jem unconsciously kicks his shoes off before lying down. It's such a brilliant metaphor. Good manners, empathy, moral obedience, they aren't just abstract ideas. Through consistent parenting and daily practice, they literally become an unconscious respectful reflex. All right, section 4. So how do individuals actually survive, let alone live peacefully, in a community that's overflowing with such hypocrisy and judgment? By comparing Atticus and Dolphus Raymond, we actually get to see two completely different survival strategies for navigating an intolerant society without conforming to its racism. Atticus is the open challenger. He uses the law and the truth to fight the system in broad daylight. But Dolphus Raymond, he plays a totally different game. He's a white man who chooses to live with a black woman and have mixed children. To avoid the constant, exhausting hostility of the town, he walks around drinking from a paper sack, pretending to be the town drunk. As he explains to the kids, he's just giving the intolerant locals an excuse. They can just say, oh, he can't help his lifestyle, he's just a drunk. It's cynical, for sure, but it's a pragmatic way to buy some peace for his family in a deeply fractured world. If we map this whole community out as a study guide, we can categorize the characters by how they respond to prejudice. At the top, we have the Mockingbirds, Boo Radley and Tom Robinson, innocent victims targeted just because they're misunderstood or because of their race. In the middle are the protectors, Atticus, Miss Maudie, Calpurnia. They shield the innocent and actively guide the kids' moral growth. And finally, the bridge builders, like Dolphus Raymond, who, despite his methods, proves that coexistence between divided worlds is actually possible. Using this as an adult discussion guide for challenging local prejudices today, the takeaways are pretty striking. We watch Scout's moral growth as she realizes Boo Radley isn't some neighborhood monster, but a real person who just deserves some privacy. She also spots the glaring hypocrisy of her teacher condemning Hitler's persecution of the Jews abroad while completely ignoring the brutal racism in her own backyard. The ultimate lesson? Reject that hypocrisy. Realize that most people, once you strip away the nasty rumors and look at them as human beings, are generally good. And finally, section 5. Let's turn all of this into actionable advice. How can we use these techniques to tackle difficult themes like systemic racism and empathy in today's classrooms?
Well, Atticus's methodology is basically a perfect, timeless blueprint for educators and parents. Step 1, you have to walk the walk. Remember Miss Maudie pointing out that Atticus is the exact same man in his living room as he is out on the public streets? Step 2, never lie to kids. When Scout asks tough questions about slurs or poverty, Atticus gives her honest answers, just tailored to her age. Step 3, don't put them in a bubble. Let them experience life and make mistakes. And step 4, which is absolutely crucial, when a child displays prejudice or disrespect, you correct it instantly. Do not let those weeds take root. The aftermath of the trial captures a really heartbreaking truth about moral development. After Tom Robinson is wrongfully convicted, Jem's idealism is totally shattered, and he's left sobbing. Atticus points out that adults have become completely desensitized to this cycle of systemic injustice. They've seen it, they accept it. Only children weep, he says, because their moral compass hasn't been corrupted yet by societal excuses. It's a huge wake-up call about why it is so absolutely critical to actively teach empathy before those biases harden into permanent apathy. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative thought. The true lesson of this story isn't just about analyzing an old book or looking back at the 1930s, it's an active, living challenge. How are you consciously choosing to stand in the shoes of those around you today? Are you letting the majority rule your conscience, or are you putting in the hard work to see people for who they truly are? Really think about it. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring the deeper lessons behind the stories we think we already know.